Thank you very much for this opportunity to do this presentation, PSK National Council. I am very pleased that I got this opportunity to present something a little different from what the sciences, and we go to things art. Those advances, those slides are advancing. And before I start, or less, I want to promise who is a member of my branch for being listed as the pharmacist of the year, and I'm happy because I'm one of his mentors. Having said that, let's look at something different today, and that is application of clinical governance framework to improve quality of healthcare. Now, as I speak and as I show my slides, may I say that I'm very happy because pharmacists have already entered into this space, but not fully. I'm sure in the audience, people will ask what's the difference between governance and management. And that's because a lot of pharmacists, and gratifying so, are already in management positions within the county. In my particular county of Kiambu, I am very proud to say one hospital which I'm also the chair of the board, and that's Royal Level 4. The MOH is a pharmacist. And when I go to my sub-county where I actually live, that is in Githunguri, the MOH, this is only a small trend of what is happening. And that way, pharmacists have already entered into the management arena, which was not the case when we were students and when we first graduated. So I'm very gratified with this, but I also want to make you and sensitize pharmacists that that's not the end. From the management position, you get to what is called now governance position. This is now, I would say, for pharmacists, the new kid round the block. And I'll be looking at the origin of, I'll be talking about the origin of clinical governance and the meaning of clinical governance versus corporate governance. I will look at the elements of clinical governance. I will look at the meaning of integrated governance and how corporate governance should interact with the clinical governance. Now, what's the origin of clinical governance? Sorry. I get mixed with my slide. The origin started in UK when a clinical governance, when an incident happened that came to be known as the Bristol Heart Scandal of 1995. And what was this? This followed an expose by an anesthetist, Dr. Stephen Bolson, who exposed an extraordinary high mortality rate for pediatric cardiac surgery at the Bristol Royal Infirmary. And following this expose, clinical governance was elaborated for the first time within the NHIS in UK service in 1995. Now, what's the meaning of clinical governance? Clinical governance is a framework through which a health system is accountable for continually improving the quality of its services and safeguarding high standards of care. Now, at the time when I was researching and working on clinical governance, I remember calling a number of pharmacists, and Sylvia Upanga then was one of them. And she was teaching at the University of Nairobi, and asked, Daktari, do we have clinical governance being taught at the School of Pharmacy? And she said, no. I went to the principal of the School of Health at the University of Nairobi, and the answer was no. I asked them whether the clinical governance is tackled at the master's level of any of the healthcare disciplines. The answer was no. And I took it upon myself to be a champion of clinical governance because as you will see very soon, and very briefly because of time, you cannot have quality healthcare if you don't appreciate what clinical governance is all about. Now, what you're seeing there is what we call the elements of clinical governance. And one of them is the education and training. I'm going clockwise. Clinical audit, clinical effectiveness, research and development, openness, and risk management. Those are the elements, what we call elements of clinical governance. Each of them is a big topic of its own. We don't have time to do now, but I just want to sensitize my fellow colleagues that there's a new area of a discipline where if you're interested, you can receive mentorship. Now, the other elements are strategic direction and strategic leadership, stakeholder involvement, information management, and communication. Now, a framework for great potential for synergy is corporate governance versus clinical governance. I say this is an area I identified very early. I got very passionate with corporate governance, and it's for those reasons that I must say I was the founder director of one of the founder directors of KEMSA. I've been a chair of a water company, chairman of the board. I've sat in the board of Kenyatta National Hospitals for now 6 years, and a few other positions that I hold either as a director or a chairman of the board. And this is an exciting area I want to excite pharmacists to enter into. And what is now the relationship between corporate governance and clinical governance? Sorry, my stuck here. The meaning of corporate governance is a system of rules, practices, and the processes by which an organization is directed and controlled. We don't have time to go into the details, but just get it, that corporate governance is a system of rules, practices, and processes by which an organization is directed and controlled. Now, what's the common objective? Corporate governance space is the space of the board of directors. That's what we call corporate governance. So when you get appointed into a position in a board of management or in a board of directors, then you're entering corporate governance space. And the role of the board of directors is to create an environment in which excellence in clinical outcomes flourishes. And I'm talking about the role of your position in a board of directors in a healthcare institution. It is to create an environment in which excellence in clinical outcomes flourishes. And the role of clinical governance, that's the clinical team, is to ensure the achievement of corporate goals and objectives. But how can the respective roles be played effectively if corporate governance and clinical governance don't speak to each other? Indeed, this is what has been the case. Indeed, let me tell you, in many places, and we have done a lot of studies here at KNH, we have found that we have gotten to a point where the corporate governance aspect and the clinical governance aspect, whatever is already on the ground, however rudimentary, they did not speak to each other in a structured manner. They did speak to each other, but not in a structured manner. And therefore, there was no synergy, and you don't get that effectiveness. Now, I'm introducing you to corporate governance. I'm also introducing to clinical governance, but simultaneously, I'm bringing to you an area of intersection where corporate governance and clinical governance intersects. And that area is the one which is called the integrated governance. Now, integrated governance refers to that of a siting space where corporate governance and clinical governance intersect. This is the key thing I want my colleagues to pick, that corporate governance and clinical governance will intersect if we are going to get that synergy. And that space is what we call the integrated governance space. The concept of integrated governance has emerged to refer jointly to the corporate governance and clinical governance duties and responsibilities of healthcare organizations. Traditionally, while the corporate governance component carries the responsibility of clinical governance does not carry the responsibilities of corporate governance. A discordant healthcare governance model constrains optimum outcomes in healthcare delivery, contributing to poor healthcare system outcomes. And the emergence of an integrated governance model is an attempt to erode the governance discordance and overcome the traditional boundaries between corporate governance and clinical governance systems. In conclusion, integrated governance acknowledges the contribution of all stakeholders, the board, the core clinical teams, the non-clinical management team, and the patient. Integrated governance provides a framework for shared understanding of 4 key attributes. Number 1, recognizably high standards of care, transparent responsibility, continuous, never-ending and dynamic improvement, accountability for all the above standards. And from here, I make a few recommendations. Recommendation number 1, this is to kickstart a national dialogue amongst key stakeholder governance concept. Recommendation number 2 is to seek ways and means of mainstreaming integrated governance into governance and management systems of national and county healthcare systems. And recommendation number 3 is to ensure that integrated governance is incorporated into the curriculum of healthcare training programs at the diploma, degree, and postgraduate levels. And the 4th one, and I think it's the final one, is to rapidly sensitize members of boards of directors, senior non-clinical management teams, and actual clinical teams of all healthcare institutions on the concept and practice of integrated governance. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.